They never imagined that the quiet one was paying attention. They believed your silence was weakness, your patience was fear, and your kindness was the open door to their cruelty. They looked at your gentleness and assumed you were someone they could break without consequence. What they didn't understand is that the strongest souls rarely announce their strength. The deepest waters make the least noise, and the person they chose to hurt was never as fragile as they assumed. Every move they made against you felt small to them, almost insignificant, just words, just actions, just choices that cut a little deeper each time. But what they didn't know is that each wound was shaping something within you. They were teaching you who they truly were while revealing who you were becoming. Your hurt became your teacher. Your silence became your shield. Your restraint became your wisdom. They thought they had you figured out. They believed they could play with your emotions, twist your loyalty, and take advantage of the heart that once trusted them. Their arrogance blinded them to the truth standing in front of them. You are not someone to be underestimated. You are someone whose strength grows in shadows, whose spirit refuses to bend, whose resilience holds a quiet fire. There comes a moment in every story when the one who was overlooked rises in a way that leaves everyone breathless, and now they stand on the edge of that moment, realizing too late that they picked the wrong soul to wound. Not because you seek revenge, not because you hold bitterness, but because life itself bends toward justice in ways their pride never expected. The very person they dismissed is the one they now fear remembering. The one they pushed aside is the one who carries a strength they can no longer deny. And slowly, painfully, they begin to understand that hurting a pure heart is never without consequence. The echoes of their actions return to them, not as punishment from you, but as the weight of truth they can no longer outrun. Many people mistake silence for weakness because they cannot imagine strength that doesn't roar. They have only seen power displayed through noise, conflict, and confrontation. They measure courage by how loudly someone speaks, not by how steadily someone stands. So when you chose silence, they thought it meant you had surrendered. They assumed you lacked the courage to fight back, the clarity to understand their intentions, or the confidence to defend yourself. What they never understood is that silence is often the sanctuary of those who know their worth. You didn't stay quiet because you were afraid. You stayed quiet because you saw no value in responding to chaos. You didn't hold back because you lacked a voice. You held back because you did not want to speak from anger. You watched, listened, and observed with the kind of patience that only someone who has been through storms can possess. He understood that reacting instantly is often the weakest form of strength, while choosing when to respond and when not to is a mastery they couldn't recognize. Silence gave you room to think. It allowed you to separate your emotions from your decisions. It helped you see people for who they truly were, not who they pretended to be. While they were busy trying to provoke you, you were quietly gathering clarity. While they were speaking loudly, you were building inner calm. While they were planning how to break you, you were learning how to elevate yourself. The kind of silence you carried wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, full of truth, full of insight they didn't see coming. Your silence unsettled them because it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of someone who doesn't need to prove anything. They expected you to argue, to defend yourself, to fight for their approval, to chase answers that you already knew were lies. When you refused to respond, they confused your discipline with weakness. But silence is rarely weakness. It is the shield of the wise. It is the refusal to pour energy into what does not deserve it. It is the quiet acknowledgement that your peace matters more than their noise. They kept pushing boundaries because they believed you were someone they could overpower. They tested your patience because they assumed it was exhaustion, not strength. They played with your emotions, thinking you were too gentle to notice the intention behind their actions. What they didn't know is that gentle souls often possess the strongest discernment. You were not blind to what they were doing. You just didn't feel the need to match their behavior. You chose a different way, a higher way, the kind of way that unsettles people who thrive on chaos. Silence became your protector. It kept you from saying what anger would regret. It kept you from lowering yourself to the level they needed you to be at in order to manipulate the moment. It allowed you to see their true character without interference or illusion. People reveal more about themselves when they believe you are not watching. And in your silence they acted freely, showing you everything you needed to know. What they never expected was how that silence would eventually become your strength. The things you didn't react to shaped you quietly. The things you didn't respond to made you wiser. The things you walked away from without explanation preserved your dignity. You grew, strengthened, and evolved, while they mistook your calmness for defeat. They believed they held the power in the situation, not realizing that power always belongs to the one who is not controlled by the actions of another. Versalis huris hauptius namare hupagates alnop. That is what they misread. They saw stillness and assumed stagnation. They saw patience and assumed fear. They saw restraint and assumed fragility. But a heart that chooses silence in the face of disrespect is not a weak heart. It is a disciplined one. A mind that refuses to react immediately is not a confused mind. It is a focused one. A soul that walks away without creating destruction is not a lost soul. It is a mature one. Their mistake was thinking your silence meant they had won. What they failed to see is that silence often belongs to those who know that truth needs no defense, dignity needs no applause, and justice needs no announcement. You were never weak. You were measured. You were grounded. You were wise. And now the very silence they misinterpreted has become the mirror showing them just how wrong they were, to pick you as the person they could break. Pain has a way of reshaping a person in ways no one notices at first. While others see only the surface, the soul understands every impact, every disappointment, every moment of pressure that presses against it. The pressure they put on you was not small, even if they pretended it was harmless. Every dismissive word, every betrayal, every manipulation carried weight. You felt that weight deeply, even when you didn't show it. Yet with each blow, something within you began to transform, quietly, silently, almost sacredly. You didn't crumble under their treatment. You absorbed it, studied it, and allowed it to reveal the truth of who they were. The pain they caused taught you where you stood, what you deserved, and what you would never tolerate again. It awakened a strength in you that comfort never could. People often assume strength grows in ease, but your strength was carved in discomfort. It was shaped by the trials you never asked for, the moments you endured alone, and the storms you walked through without anyone offering shelter. What they could not comprehend is that their cruelty became the catalyst for your evolution. Every time they dismissed your feelings, they pushed you closer to knowing your worth. Every time they tried to diminish your confidence, they unknowingly contributed to the building of your resilience. Every time they attempted to control your emotions or break your peace, they accidentally helped you discover how powerful your peace truly was. They believed they were weakening you, but the opposite was unfolding in silence. Pressure forces growth the way fire purifies gold. Heat reshapes what refuses to break. You were being tempered, not destroyed. They thought their actions would shatter you, but all they managed to do was remove the illusions you once had about them. You began to see their patterns clearly, their motives unmistakably, and their character unmistakably exposed. The very things they used to hurt you became the very things that saved you from staying connected to someone unworthy of your spirit. You didn't become hardened by their actions. You became wiser. Wisdom does not always come from kind teachers. Sometimes it comes from painful encounters, broken trust, and unexpected betrayals. Wisdom grows quietly, through tears you never explained, through nights you kept to yourself, through realizations that forced you to close doors you once tried so hard to keep open. They didn't break you. They awakened you. They forced you to see what your heart was too loyal to admit earlier. As the pressure increased, so did your awareness. You learned how to understand silence, how to read intentions, how to recognize the early signs of manipulation, and how to trust the instinct you once doubted. Pain sharpened your intuition. It taught you to see beyond words, beyond excuses, beyond temporary behaviors. You started noticing patterns you once overlooked. You began protecting your energy without explaining why. You stopped giving endless chances because you finally understood that the pressure was not meant to destroy you. It was meant to redirect you. Your growth did not happen publicly. It happened in the quiet moments when you questioned your own strength, when you looked for answers that seemed impossible to find, when you forced yourself to rise even when everything felt heavy. That unseen growth became the armor you now carry. It became the reason you stand more firmly, speak more honestly, and choose more carefully. The pressure that once felt unbearable eventually became the reason you are unshakable. They may never admit it, but a part of them notices the change. You no longer respond the way you used to. You no longer tolerate what you once forgave. You no longer shrink to make others comfortable. That shift unsettles them. They didn't expect their own behavior to be the force that pushed you into your strength. They didn't expect you to evolve into someone they can no longer influence, manipulate, or control. Their miscalculation was simple. They believed pain would make you weaker. They believed pressure would cause you to fall apart. They believed their actions would define you. Instead, pain taught you what resilience feels like. Pressure taught you how to stand when the world feels heavy. Hurt taught you what you deserve and what you will never accept again. They forged your strength without ever intending to, and now they must live with the truth. The person they tried to break has become someone they were never prepared to face. A loyal heart is one of the rarest treasures in this world, and yet it is often taken for granted by those who do not understand its worth. You gave your loyalty freely, not because you were naive, but because you believed in sincerity, connection, and integrity. You valued relationships deeply, so you offered your trust with a genuine spirit. But to someone who operates from selfishness, manipulation, or insecurity, loyalty looks like an opportunity to exploit, rather than a gift to honor. They saw your loyalty as a weakness, when in reality it was the very thing that set you apart. They assumed that because you cared, you could be controlled. They believed that because you stayed through difficult moments, you would tolerate disrespect. They thought your forgiving nature meant unlimited chances, as though you would keep absorbing hurt without eventually recognizing its source. What they didn't understand is that loyalty has boundaries. A loyal heart will stand with you through storms, but it will not drown for you. Life heart, it will endure, support, and care, but it will not abandon itself for someone who refuses to value it. Your loyalty was mistaken for dependency. They thought you needed them more than you needed peace. They assumed you were attached to them in a way that would keep you from walking away, no matter how they behaved. But true loyalty is not chains. It is choice. And the moment you realized your loyalty was being taken advantage of, it stopped being a reason to stay and became a reason to leave. You saw clearly that the bond you protected was not being protected by them, and loyalty without reciprocity is erosion, not connection. Walking away was not weakness, it was the strongest act you could have taken. The decision required clarity, self-respect, and the courage to accept what your heart tried to overlook for far too long. It forced you to recognize that some people only value your presence until they realize your absence has consequences. They believed you would always be available, always forgiving, always giving them one more chance. But the moment you chose yourself, everything shifted. Your silence became a boundary they could not cross. Your distance became a reminder they could not ignore. Your loyalty did not disappear. It simply returned home to where it belonged, within you. You learned that loyalty must never be given at the expense of your own well-being. You learned that love without respect is captivity, not connection. You learned that staying loyal to someone who harms you is not a sign of character. It is a sign of misplaced hope. And once you corrected that, your entire path changed. You became someone who understands the difference between patience and self-sacrifice, between compassion and self-betrayal. The shift in you unsettled them more deeply than you may ever know. They didn't expect the person they used for emotional convenience to grow into someone who refuses to be used. They didn't expect the person they thought they had control over to become someone whose strength makes control impossible. That is the regret they now carry quietly. It is not always spoken, but it lingers inside them, the realization that the person they misjudged was far more powerful than they believed. You didn't become cold after everything, you became discerning. You didn't stop caring, you stopped caring for those who proved they didn't deserve it. You didn't lose your loyalty, you elevated its standards. You became someone who understands that loyalty belongs to those who protect it, cherish it, and reciprocate it. Anyone else is merely a lesson, not a loss. The most painful part for them is knowing that you did not walk away empty. You walked away wiser, stronger, and more grounded. The loyalty they abused became the foundation of your transformation. Meanwhile, what they are left with is the knowledge that no one else will offer them the kind of dedication you once gave so freely. They now face the reality that your loyalty was their privilege, not your obligation. What hurts them most is the simplicity of the truth. You did not change. They revealed who they were, and you responded accordingly. Your loyalty was not blind, it was hopeful, and once hope died, so did their influence. Your departure became the moment they could not escape, because it forced them to see the value they discarded and the treasure they mishandled. Your loyalty did not make you weak. It made you rare, and walking away proved that rarity is something you protect, not something you give to those who cannot recognize its worth. People often believe that their harmful actions will leave you shattered, as if your heart is made of fragile glass that breaks at the slightest impact. They underestimate the resilience of a soul that has survived storms long before they ever arrived. They imagine their betrayal will define you, their cruelty will weaken you, and their choices will leave you unable to rise again. What they fail to realize is that life has a way of turning pain into strength, wounds into wisdom, and heartbreak into a deeper understanding of your own worth. You were tested by moments that cut deeper than you admitted. Their behavior forced you to confront emotions you did not expect, and the hurt they caused lingered longer than anyone around you realized. But this painful journey did not destroy you. It refined you. You were not reduced. You were reshaped. You were not diminished. You were awakened. Their actions became the unexpected sculptor that chiseled away illusion, naivety, and misplaced hope, leaving behind someone more grounded, more discerning, and far stronger than before. What they meant for damage became the foundation of your transformation. You learned how to stand on your own feet without depending on anyone to catch you. You learned how to heal without seeking validation from the one who hurt you. You learned that strength is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it grows quietly through your ability to endure, to reflect, and to rise when no one is watching. They believed they were pushing you toward a breaking point, but in reality, they were pushing you toward a breakthrough. Pain has a strange way of teaching you what peace feels like. When you experience chaos caused by someone you trusted, you begin to understand the value of your own tranquility. When your heart is mishandled, you start guarding it with wisdom instead of fear. When your kindness is exploited, you learn to give it with intention, not impulsively. Their hurt triggered a transformation you may never have chosen, but now you can see how necessary it was. Your transformation didn't happen overnight. It unfolded in the quiet hours when you questioned your own worth, when you replayed conversations trying to understand what went wrong, and when you were forced to face the truth about someone you once defended. Slow, steady, and silent, your healing grew roots long before you noticed the branches. It began with acceptance, matured into strength, and ended with clarity. They expected you to collapse beneath the weight of what they did. They expected you to lose yourself trying to understand them. They expected you to become smaller, weaker, and easier to control. Instead, you became someone they could no longer reach. Their assumptions dissolved when your transformation became undeniable. The very strength they tried to strip away rose to the surface, unmistakable and unbreakable. What unsettles them now is knowing that the version of you they tried to hurt no longer exists. You evolved beyond their influence. You outgrew the environment where they once held power. You expanded into someone whose self-worth is no longer negotiable. They cannot access the places within you that once welcomed them. They cannot manipulate the emotions that once played with. They cannot diminish the confidence that now stands firm and steady. Your transformation holds a quiet irony. They pushed you toward your strongest self, all while believing they were breaking you. They awakened a fire within you that they never intended to spark. They created the conditions for your growth while trying to limit your potential. They became the unknowing authors of your resilience, the unwilling architects of your strength. One day, they will look back and realize that their behavior was the turning point in your life. The moment you stopped tolerating what hurt you. The moment you recognized your worth without their validation. The moment you reclaimed your power. What they thought would leave you ruined, left you renewed. What they assumed would weaken you, revealed the depth of your endurance. The truth will settle in for them slowly, painfully, unmistakably. Their actions shaped someone they can no longer influence, someone they can no longer fool, someone they can no longer control. And the regret that follows is not merely about losing you. It is about knowing that the pain they thought would break you is the very thing that made you unstoppable. Some people convince themselves that you are incapable of rising without their approval. They make you feel as though your progress is tied to their acceptance, your growth dependent on their validation, your path controlled by their judgment. They behave as if your future is a branch growing from their tree, and without their support you will wither. This illusion is comforting to them because it allows them to feel powerful, superior, and necessary. They enjoy believing that you will always need them, always seek their praise, always wait for their permission to take the next step in your life. You lived under that illusion for a while too, because you trusted their words. You believed they cared. You assumed they wanted the best for you. You thought their guidance came from wisdom, not insecurity. But time eventually revealed the truth. Their support was a cage, not a blessing. Their opinions were anchors, not wings. They weren't guiding you. They were limiting you. Without realizing it, you allowed them to shape your decisions, silence your instincts, and shrink your confidence. But life has a way of disrupting illusions. A moment comes when the heart awakens, not with anger, but with clarity. You begin to feel a quiet shift inside you, a sense that something is wrong with the way you have been living. You start noticing how your dreams became smaller when you shared them with them, how your confidence dimmed whenever they offered their advice, how your spirit felt heavy whenever you sought their approval. That heaviness becomes impossible to ignore. It is the soul's way of saying, this is not where you belong. Once that realization dawned on you, everything changed. You began to rise, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. You stopped seeking permission for things that were already within your right to pursue. You stopped asking for encouragement from someone who never wanted to see you shine. You stopped bending yourself into a smaller version just to keep their comfort intact. You finally saw that rising was not a matter of ability. It was a matter of courage. And when you started rising, they panicked, not outwardly, not in ways that were obvious, but inside themselves. They felt something slipping away, something they never imagined they could lose. It wasn't just you, it was the control they believed they had over you. They watched you grow into someone who no longer needed their nod of approval. They witnessed your confidence renewing itself. They noticed your steps becoming firmer, your decisions bolder, your presence lighter. It confused them. It threatened their sense of power. They had convinced themselves that you depended on them, that without their influence you would remain lost, unsure and stagnant, but what unfolded was the opposite. You became more secure when you stopped listening to their doubts. You became more alive when you stopped letting them define your limits. You became more successful when you stopped holding yourself back to avoid offending their pride. Rising without their approval didn't just elevate you, it revealed their insecurities. What unsettles them most is the realization that you are always capable. You simply hadn't realized it. You simply hadn't believed in your own strength, because you were surrounded by voices that never wanted you to discover it. Once you broke free from that environment, your growth became impossible to ignore. You stepped into opportunities they never imagined you could handle. You embraced new paths they once convinced you weren't ready for. You exceeded expectations they quietly prayed you would never reach. Your growth exposed something deeper. They were never supporting you. They were suppressing you. And now that you have risen beyond their reach, they are left to face the reality that their influence has crumbled. The version of you that relied on them no longer exists. In its place stands someone they cannot manipulate, someone they cannot limit, someone they cannot intimidate. Someone they cannot intimidate. Their regret now runs deeper than losing a connection. It is the regret of knowing they miscalculated you completely. They thought you would forever orbit around their approval. Instead, you have become someone whose light has its own source, whose strength has its own foundation, whose future has its own direction. You no longer walk behind them, you walk beyond them. And nothing terrifies a small soul more than watching the person they tried to hold back rise into a life they can no longer influence. Some people convince themselves they can act without consequences, as if life is blind to their choices. They behave as though their words will fade into the air, their actions will dissolve into silence, and their intentions will remain hidden in the shadows forever. They assume that hurting someone with a pure heart is something they can walk away from without ever looking back. But life has its own rhythm, its own balance, its own way of revealing truth at the right moment. What they believed would remain buried eventually rises, with a force they cannot escape. The consequences they never took seriously begin as quiet whispers in their own conscience, small moments of discomfort, flickers of guilt they refuse to acknowledge, unease that visits them at unexpected times. They brush it off, try to distract themselves, try to silence that discomfort with pride. But the truth never stays quiet for long. It begins to gather weight. Slowly, steadily, inevitably, it makes its presence known. The reality of what they did follows them, whether they want to face it or not. When someone intentionally hurts you, they often imagine that your pain is separate from their life. They think their cruelty affects only you, not understanding that every action someone puts into the world circles back eventually. Life is not punished or rewarded by your hands. It is reflected, and their reflection begins to appear in ways they cannot predict. Situations backfire, relationships shift, peace becomes harder to find. They may not immediately connect these moments to their behavior, but deep down, something unsettles them. They start feeling the weight of their own choices when they least expect it. While you quietly heal, they quietly unravel. While you grow stronger from the ashes, they slowly feel the discomfort of their own fire. The impact of their choices shows up in the cracks of their confidence, in the tension they carry, in the thoughts they cannot escape at night. Consequences rarely arrive loudly. They arrive subtly, through a series of lessons that force a person to confront themselves. They believed their actions would go unnoticed, that they had succeeded in hiding the truth behind manipulation, excuses, or denial. But the universe has a remarkable way of revealing character. What is done in the dark finds a way to surface, not to embarrass them, but to expose them to themselves. That is the consequence they never prepared for, the moment they can no longer lie to their own soul. Nothing is more haunting than the truth confronting the person who tried to evade it. Their regret begins in the smallest of ways, a memory that resurfaces unexpectedly, a moment of clarity they cannot ignore, a comparison between who you used to be and who you have become. They see your growth, your strength, your glow, and they remember how they treated you. Regret sits quietly on their shoulders, not as punishment you imposed, but as the weight of their own actions. The irony is that you never sought revenge. You never wished harm upon them. You simply stepped back, healed, and moved forward. And in doing so, you allowed life to teach them what you never could. You allowed their own choices to become their own teachers. Nothing cuts deeper than realizing you were the origin of the chaos you are now facing. They feel it in ways they cannot put into words. Each setback, each disappointment, each moment of discomfort becomes a mirror, reminding them of the pain they caused. As the truth settles in, they begin to understand something they overlooked. Actions have a memory. Words have a memory. Intentions have a memory. Life remembers what people hope will be forgotten, and the consequences they dismissed begin shaping their path, just as the pain they caused shaped yours. They wanted to believe they could outrun what they did, but you cannot outrun yourself. The choices you make follow you, echo through you, and eventually return to you. Their regret has nothing to do with losing control over you. It comes from realizing they misused the chance to be someone meaningful in your story. They lost the opportunity to stand beside a strong, kind, loyal soul. And now they must live with the truth that the damage they caused did not destroy you. Your healing destroyed their illusion of superiority. They believed consequences were distant. They learned they were personal. The very person they hurt became the mirror reflecting their deepest faults. And that is a consequence no one can escape. People often assume that the person they hurt will remain frozen in the version they once knew. They cling to the memory of who you were when you tolerated their behavior, forgave their excuses, and overlooked their flaws. They convince themselves that your softness is permanent, your naivety unchanging, your loyalty unbreakable. What unsettles them is realizing that while they stayed the same, you kept evolving. Your growth was quiet, steady, and unseen, happening in the depths of your pain, far from the places where they expected you to remain trapped. You changed in ways they never anticipated. You learned to understand patterns instead of excuses. You learned to recognize manipulation instead of believing empty promises. You learned to read intentions instead of being blinded by words. What once confused you became clear. What once hurt you became wisdom. What once held you became too small for the person you were becoming. Your evolution was not an act of rebellion. It was the natural result of a soul refusing to remain wounded. The more you grew, the more their influence faded. They tried the same tactics, but they no longer worked. They repeated the same behaviors, but they no longer triggered you. They used the same tone, the same manipulation, the same emotional traps, but the person who once responded to those methods no longer existed. You outgrew the environment they tried to keep you in, and that shift shook the foundation of their confidence. Growth can be frightening to those who refuse to change. They become unsettled when the person they could once control no longer bends. They become irritated when their words no longer carry weight. They become confused when their presence no longer affects your peace. They become threatened when their power dissolves. Suddenly, everything they counted on, their ability to influence you, to manipulate you, to keep you doubting yourself, falls apart in front of them. Your transformation was not rooted in revenge. It was rooted in healing. You didn't change to hurt them. You changed to save yourself. You didn't become stronger to intimidate them. You became stronger because pain demanded it. You didn't walk away to punish them. You walked away because your soul recognized that staying would be its own punishment. Your growth is the natural outcome of choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over self-betrayal. What they'd never anticipated is how powerful healing makes a person. Healing gives you eyes that see through pretenses. Healing gives you a voice that no longer trembles. Healing gives you boundaries that do not bend. Healing gives you the courage to protect your energy and the wisdom to distance yourself from anyone who threatens your wisdom. Healing reshapes your identity in ways that make returning to old versions of yourself impossible. The version of you they hurt was gentle, trusting, hopeful, and forgiving. You still carry those qualities, but they are no longer unguarded. They now live within a person who understands that not everyone deserves access to your heart. Your evolution protected the most precious parts of you by surrounding them with discernment, strength, and clarity. This is what unsettles them most. Your softness did not disappear, it became selective. They watch you from a distance now, perhaps confused by your growth, perhaps intimidated by your poise, perhaps regretful in ways they cannot admit. They see someone who carries themselves with a confidence that was once unseen. They see someone who no longer reacts emotionally to their provocations. They see someone who has reclaimed their power with a quiet, steady presence. The contrast between who you were and who you have become confronts them with their own lack of progress. In the quiet corners of their mind, they begin to understand that they lost access not because you became someone else, but because you finally returned to yourself. The real you, the strong, intuitive, discerning you, was always there beneath the layers of pain and confusion. You simply needed time to rise. And once you rose, they realized too late that the person they thought they could manage is now someone they cannot reach. Your evolution is not a transformation they can reverse. It is not something they can undermine. It is not something they can control. It is the result of lessons you learned from the very pain they caused. That is the irony that weighs on them. They shaped a version of you they are now unprepared to face. They created the distance they now complain about. They triggered the strength they hoped you would never find. And while you continue moving forward, grounded and healed, they remain haunted by the realization that the person they once hurt is now someone who stands beyond their influence, beyond their reach, and beyond their understanding. Regret has a way of settling into a person's heart slowly, like a shadow that expands as the truth becomes impossible to avoid. In the beginning, they feel nothing. They justify their actions, dismiss your pain, and convince themselves they were right. They assume the past is buried, that the consequences will never reach them, that their behavior will never circle back in a way that affects their life. But regret is patient. It waits. It grows in silence. And when it finally arrives, it arrives with clarity sharper than any memory they try to ignore. What they begin to feel is not just regret for what they did, it is regret for who they misjudged. They thought you were someone easy to break, someone whose worth could be diminished, someone whose spirit could be controlled. They thought you would forever remain the version of yourself that tolerated disrespect and forgave without boundaries. They were blind to the depth of your strength, the resilience of your spirit, and the quiet power you carried without ever needing to show it. Their regret comes from realizing too late that they picked the wrong person to treat carelessly. They remember the moments when you were kind, the times you listened, the times you showed understanding even when you were hurting. They remember how you offered grace they didn't deserve, how you chose honesty when they chose deception, how you stayed loyal while they played with your trust. And now, in the stillness of their own thoughts, they replay those moments with a heaviness they can no longer escape. They begin to understand that the value of a pure heart is only visible once it is gone. The regret deepens when life exposes their choices, not through punishment, but through comparison. They encounter people who mirror the behavior they once showed you: coldness, manipulation, inconsistency. They experience the very treatment they once justified, and suddenly the weight of their actions becomes undeniable. They start to understand what you felt. They begin to see how deeply their actions cut, and the pain they now endure becomes the lesson they tried to avoid. The realization that they targeted the wrong person does not hit them all at once. It builds in layers. The first layer is confusion. Why doesn't life feel the same anymore? The second is discomfort. Why does peace feel harder to find? The third is recognition. Maybe the problem wasn't the person I hurt, but the person I was. By the time clarity arrives, it is too late. You have already grown into someone beyond their reach. They look at your evolution and feel a kind of ache they cannot explain. They see the strength you've gained, the wisdom you carry, the peace that surrounds you. They notice how you no longer react to them, no longer chase explanations, no longer plead for respect. They see a version of you that is whole, grounded and self-assured, and that image becomes a mirror reflecting their own immaturity. The contrast is painful, not because of jealousy, but because of truth. Regret also comes from the understanding that they contributed nothing to the person you've become. Your strength did not come from their support. It grew in the absence of it. Your healing was not inspired by their apology. It was inspired by your decision to reclaim your life. Your success was not nurtured by their encouragement. It flourished when you cut the ties that once limited you. They realized that the best version of you emerged without them, and that truth stings in ways they never expected. But the deepest regret, the kind that lingers in silence, is knowing they misjudged your worth. They treated you as replaceable, only to discover you were a rarity. They treated your love as ordinary, only to realize it was extraordinary. They treated your kindness as weakness, only to learn it was the strength they never had. And now they must live with the knowledge that they lost someone who would have stood by them through storms, someone who gave without calculation, someone whose presence was a blessing they failed to honor. They try to move on, but their mind carries reminders, a familiar voice, a certain type of compassion, a gentle presence. They notice these qualities in others and feel a sudden emptiness because none of it compares to what you once offered. Regret is not loud. It whispers, it visits, it stays. And in time, they understand the truth they once refused to see. They didn't just lose someone, they lost the version of themselves they could have become had they treated you better. Your life continues forward, brighter and freer, untouched by their internal battles. And while your growth becomes your reward, their regret becomes their constant reminder that they underestimated the wrong soul. In the end, the story is not about what they did, it is about what you became. Pain shaped you, but it did not define you. Betrayal wounded you, but it did not imprison you. Their choices may have left scars, but those same scars became the proof of your endurance, the evidence of your strength, the markings of a soul that refused to break. You rose, not because the world made it easy, but because you discovered that your worth was never dependent on anyone's treatment of you. The person they tried to diminish became the person they can no longer reach. The heart they tried to manipulate became the heart that now chooses with discernment. The spirit they tried to weaken became the spirit that stands taller than ever. Your growth is not a victory over them. It is a victory over the version of yourself that once believed their behavior was acceptable. You outgrew what hurt you, and in doing so you reclaimed every piece of yourself they once underestimated. Let them carry their regret. Let them confront the truths they once ignored. Let them wrestle with the consequences life placed in their hands. None of that belongs to you anymore. Your journey has moved beyond the echoes of their actions. You are not defined by what they tried to do. You are defined by how powerfully you rose in spite of it. Walk forward with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their value. Carry the kind of peace that comes from surviving storms that were meant to destroy you. And remember this, the wrong person can never dim the light of the right soul. They may have chosen to hurt you, but life chose to rebuild you. And now you stand as the undeniable proof that those who pick the wrong person to mess with eventually learn the truth. Strength lives in silence. Healing creates power, and a heart like yours was never as breakable as they believed.